In February of 1906, Sergei Rachmaninoff, tired of the political instability that the 1905 Russian Revolution had left in its wake, resigned from his conducting post at the Bolshoi Theater. After spending the summer in Italy, he moved to Dresden in the fall with his wife and 3-year-old daughter, intending to devote himself exclusively to composition. While the choice of Dresden seemed arbitrary, the fact that the city was a 90-minute train ride from Leipzig, where his favorite conductor, Artur Nikisch, presided over the Gewandhaus Orchestra, may have been an indication that he was planning to write a symphonic work. The premiere of Rachmaninoff's first symphony in 1897 had been so disastrous and traumatic that he temporarily stopped composing, falling into a deep depression that lasted 3 years. Now, apparently ready to confront the demons the first symphony's failure had released, he began work on his second. Composing in total secrecy, he completed a final draft of the symphony in January of 1907 and then returned to Russia, where he orchestrated the work over the summer. Rachmaninoff led the symphony's premiere in St. Petersburg on February 8, 1908. This time, his symphony was acclaimed by both listeners and critics, who enthusiastically embraced the work's soaring melodies, moments of tender reflection, and vigorous dance-like energy. Although posterity would confirm this early assessment, the stature of Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony would be clouded for decades by a widely held opinion among musicians and critics that his large-scale works needed pruning to achieve structural coherence. This vaguely patronizing attitude manifested itself in performances of the symphony that could include as many as 29 different cuts of widely varying lengths. Interestingly, Rachmaninoff agreed to these disfigurements, although he always conducted the piece in its original form, and once told a conductor that while he agreed to cuts in a spirit of collegiality, even a request for a cut of 2 bars tore him to shreds. Rachmaninoff's personality, his work, and even the externalities of his life were filled with these sorts of contradictions, and they conferred upon him an aura of always being a bit out of place. His famously stoic exterior, Stravinsky called him a 6.5-foot scowl, was belied by the heart-on-its-sleeve emotionality of his music and the warm-hearted good humor he would display with his family and friends. He lived the life of a 20th century man, settling in Manhattan in 1918 and dying in Beverly Hills in 1943, yet he remained devoted to the values and aesthetics of late 19th century Russia. He was an introvert and one of music's most celebrated performers, an unassuming man and an aristocrat in the grand style, whose life was irrevocably changed by a proletariat revolution. He pursued his devotion to beauty against the backdrop of one of human history's most violent and destructive periods. He considered his own work with the exacting eye of a perfectionist, yet he could be overly credulous when confronted by the opinions of others. In Russia, musical conservatives who loved Tchaikovsky found Rachmaninoff's music too modern, while those who believed Russian art music should be based on folk material found it either too European or dissonant, and devotees of avant-garde composers like Scriabin dismissed it as reactionary. On the international stage, his music was often characterized as a sentimental, somewhat gloomy knockoff of Tchaikovsky's, an anachronism in a contemporary musical landscape dominated by 12-tone serialism, quasi-scientific methodologies, and a level of experimentation that had effectively brought the common practice era in art music to a close. It was perhaps inevitable that all of these perceived contradictions would require time for us to process. The impulse to shed our immediate past is both natural and transitory. What was vitally important to listeners and musicians in 1920 is much less important than what the critical distance of time has allowed us to appreciate in Rachmaninoff's music as well-constructed, expressive, and simply beautiful. The horrifying events of the 20th century have brought into question the modernist concept that cultural progress is historically inevitable, and as a result, we're freer to look upon art less ideologically and to more openly experience what's in front of us. Thus, the enthusiasm with which audiences have reacted to Rachmaninoff's art is increasingly shared by musicians and scholars, and as the years pass, there's every reason to expect that this confirmation of his genius will continue to be solidified.